Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of the Geo Trip. I'm here with my co host, Dr. Kyron Prince, and our amazing guest, Dr. Anita Marshall. And this is Lee Welcome. Dr. Anita Marshall is a senior lecturer in the Department of Geological Sciences at the University of Florida in Gainesville and a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. Dr. Marshall's primary area of expertise is geoscience education, where her research centers on the experiences of people with disabilities and other undeserved groups in science disciplines, experiential learning, the the culture of geosciences, and using technology to bridge access gaps in field learning. Dr. Anita Marshall, welcome to the GeoTrip.
Thanks for having me. This is very exciting.
We are really excited to have you here. Just to get us going a little bit, can you share a little bit about your geohistory with our listeners?
Sure. I actually, when I was, I guess, if you want to do like the back in the day version, I learned to read with National Geographic magazines. So I've always had this fascination with nature and the natural world and, you know, no real formal introduction other than, reading as much as I could about everything. And then when I was in high school, I had a biology teacher that got permission to teach geology as an honors course for one semester. And she got to pick her students. And she said, Anita, do you want to be in my geology class next semester? And I remember looking at her and saying, What's geology? And she said something I'll never forget, which was, it's everything you already love. And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's earthquakes and volcanoes and gemstones and rocks and all of that stuff that you're already super into." And she was right. I absolutely love the class, but she really taught the class as sort of a like a rock hounding perspective. Geology is something fun you can do on the weekends, and I never got the idea that it was a vocation or a career. So I signed up for intro geology in college because I liked my high school class so much, and I quickly picked up on the fact that it was actually a job, like a career that people were training for. And I'd gone to college as a music education major on a band scholarship, but I changed my major and never looked back.
I absolutely love it. What a non traditional start. We've had a lot of guests who are like legacy geologists. Myself,
Yep.
I love the fact that you were able to really pick out from that this is something that is more than just a hobby or a fun recreational activity, but something that you could turn into a career.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we really miss even in undergrad level education, in a lot of our rocks for jocks class or whatever you want to call intro geology classes for non-majors. We don't really do a very good job of demonstrating that this is a vocation, that this is a whole career path and that there are so many opportunities out there, that it's not just, oh, look at these pretty shiny rocks. You know, there's actually real things you can do as a career.
I love that. I definitely am stealing that and making it my tagline. Like geology, it's something you already know and love.
Yep, it's everything you already love.
So remind me, you said you initially went to college as
Hmm.
a music education major?
Yes, that's right. I was on a band scholarship, and I thought being a band director sounded like a fun vocation. I've always been interested in teaching, so yeah, I was in the marching band and the concert band, and even when I changed my major, I kept my scholarship and stayed in the band, which was very challenging to balance with my field trip heavy geology degree and my football intensive marching band schedule.
So I guess that always knowing that you wanted to teach was geoscience education then a natural, like an intentional career choice or happy coincidence?
I don't don't think anything I've done was an intentional choice, except maybe going back for my PhD. No, so I really didn't get any opportunity to explore teaching in geology at all in my undergrad or in my master's program. I was on a research assistantship, never TA'd a single class, teaching assistant. I was always doing research based work. And it wasn't until I finished my master's degree and needed a local job and applied to the local community college. And they gave me an interview. And I even said in the interview, are you guys aware that I have never taught a class in my life? The hiring person at the community college is like, you'll get the hang of it. That was that.
Shout out to all the colleges out there giving us the on-the-job training that we need to become effective, effective teachers. You all are the real MVPs.
Yeah, so I really didn't get into geoscience education until I went back to school for my PhD many years later.
Excellent. So I love the fact that we've now started with like on the job training, but you said you went back for your PhD many years later. Can I ask what encouraged or directed that change? And how did that inform your research?
Well, that story is basically the root of why I do what I do now. In my final year of my master's program, I was hit as a pedestrian by a drunk driver and nearly died in the accident. I spent months in the hospital. I had 7 reconstructive surgeries. Um, I had to learn to walk again. I was in a wheelchair for a year, and the job at the community college was an adjunct position, so it gave me something to do that was within my physical capacity, which at the time wasn't much, and sort of kept me in geology. And as I worked through my physical therapies and got better at walking and moving around, I started thinking about getting back on the academic track and going for my PhD. But I really couldn't think of anybody. No, there were no role models or examples that came to mind when I thought about geoscientists with disabilities. I was like, can I think of a single example of, anybody who has made this work? Because my undergrad and my master's were both very physically intensive, field work heavy programs. And that's what I loved about them. But thinking about going back to that, I knew that I could not do the type of work that I had done before. So I was very hesitant to pursue that. And so I have a 7 year gap between when I finished my master's and when I started my PhD. That it's kind of silly when I think about it now, but every semester I showed my students the same video. It's this old National Geographic called Volcano Nature's Inferno, which is, a glorious glimpse into the late 90s, early 2000s. And it has a segment, it shows different snippets of people that live and work with volcanoes. And one of the segments is on a volcanologist named Stanley Williams. And he was in an accident on a volcano. The volcano erupted during a field trip, during a conference. And there were a number of geologists that died in that eruption, and he survived, but he was disabled in the process. And there's this clip of him back out on the volcano, starting up his field work again. And I watched every semester, watched him walk up this volcano, and I watched how he was walking. And I realized that the leg injuries that he had were very similar to mine. And, it's just every semester I showed that video, and every semester it just sort of creeped a little further into my head that I was like, you were looking for an example, and here's an example. Like, here's somebody that's doing it. So maybe you could do it. And it just over time, every semester kind of gave me just a little bit more confidence to, maybe put some feelers out there and see if I could do it myself.
Wow, Anita, thank you so much for sharing that personal story, your lived experience regarding what influenced your trajectory. And what an important reminder of how representation matters by being able to sometimes
Yep.
visually see or hear or learn of or realize what the gaps are in our career, in our profession, in our research. So thank you again.
Yeah, it's really important to what I do now. I going back to get my PhD, I realized that doing academic geology as a non-disabled person and doing it with a disability were like two different universes. It was a completely different experience. And initially I was just going to do a straight volcanology PhD program, but I saw a problem that needed addressed. A lot of it was just my personal experience, my own challenges that I was having during my PhD. And I had this thought on a particularly bad field trip experience that it just stinks so bad the way that we teach our students and the way that we force them into these like physically extremely rigorous activities in the name of education. And your physical prowess doesn't have anything to do with your mental, like your academic ability and your ability to do geology, but the two are so intertwined, this physicality on the academic side, that we almost can't pull them apart in these settings. And as a result, we're disenfranchising a lot of students. We're keeping them out of the discipline. And so I came home from this particularly bad field trip experience and I just threw myself into the research and decided that I was going to change my focus from volcanology to geoscience education, looking specifically at the experiences of people with disabilities in the geosciences. And I've stayed on that track ever since.
Again, thank you so much for sharing that vulnerability. And I am requesting a off podcast chat just because I've had the same experience at my PhD and I'd love to hear some thoughts.
Okay, we will definitely chat.
Yeah, I think it's really more common than we realize, especially for people with hidden challenges or hidden disabilities. It's so macho. I guess that's the best way that
Hmm.
I can think of, that you don't really always feel like comfortable and confident speaking up and saying like, hey, I don't think I can manage that. But it sounds like you were really deliberate and thoughtful about bringing your live experiences to bear in your PhD experience and research. What was the reception to that like?
Well, originally, not great. I remember I wrote up a new dissertation proposal and, I turned it in and the department chair read it over and he said, "Wow, that looks like some really great work. And we have nobody here that can help mentor you with this work. There's nobody in our department that has any kind of experience that can help you with this research." But he said if I could find one external committee member that could help me, with the research, that he would give me the green light to change over to geoscience education. And I was able to do that. That's how I originally connected with the IAGD, the International Association for Geoscience Diversity, right at the time that I had turned that dissertation proposal in, which was actually a very rough version of the very slick kinds of things I do now with my accessible field trips. But this sort of like, you know, baling wire and bubblegum version of using technology to bridge access gaps in the field. And right about the time I turned that in, I saw an advertisement for a research project run by the IAGD on trying out some accessible fieldwork ideas. And I cold called the PIs on the project and I told them my story. I sent them my resume. I sent them my little dissertation proposal that I'd just written up. And I said, I'd really love to join your team, which I tell students now is either the most ridiculous thing I've ever done. Like, just, I think back on it. I was like, that's wild that I'm just like, hey, people I don't know from anybody, how about you put me on your team? But the wild thing is they did. And, I got mentors for life out of that project. So, shoot your shot, I guess.
Yeah, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
Yeah.
So, for those who may not be familiar with the International Association for Geoscience Diversity, what can you tell us about the organization and its initiatives?
So it is a small nonprofit working primarily in the geosciences that aims to improve access and inclusion for people with disabilities. So, specifically looking at supporting research projects to supporting initiatives that open up pathways for people with disabilities in a discipline that has traditionally been incredibly hard for people with disabilities to succeed. So, to me, the most powerful thing that I got out of the IAGD when I connected with them was community. I really felt alone and isolated during that PhD experience, and connecting with them made me realize that there were people with disabilities everywhere and in all career stages of the geosciences doing really great things. And it gave me that community and that sense of belonging that I was really missing in my own program. And that's to me really powerful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I definitely agree. Again, the power in representation, the power in community, it's what carries us, right? This is not a
Hmm.
journey to walk solo. And it's something that why we love the Geo Trip because we feel like we're helping build and bring together different communities that sometimes don't intersect. So, with that being said, and just kind of thinking about intersection, can you tell me how do you think, aside from your lived experience, how did your academic background in your science prepare you for your current role as the executive director of the International Association for Geoscience Diversity, or the IAGD?
I think y- it's interesting when I changed over to geoscience education research during my PhD. I realized when I started kind of running in those circles, in the geoscience education circles, that a lot of other geoscience subdisciplines didn't really respect that as a legitimate area of research, as like legitimate scholarship. And that was very frustrating because, it's just as complex and challenging as any other type of subdiscipline, but interestingly enough, because I had already published in volcano geophysics, it almost gave me this street cred where people were willing to listen to me. I was like, "Oh, well, she's a legitimate scientist, so I guess we'll listen to what she has to say on this." It was this very weird thing where it sort of gave me, the inroads to talk to people that wouldn't normally entertain the kinds of ideas that we, try to spread through the IAGD. So, yeah, it was interesting. I use that all the time. I use my geology training all the time in running field trips too, where I can be an accessibility expert, but I can also be a subject matter expert in the places that we visit and the things that we do with our students. So it's given me a very, very diverse tool set in which to work with. So that's been really nice.
I really love that. And I really love hearing about how you utilize your interdisciplinary or dynamic history or background to inform the work that you're doing right now. So, again, thank you for sharing. You have no idea how hard I'm smiling right now because it's always nice when you move off of the non traditional path into more interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary spaces to get to talk to others who are doing that same work. Because I don't know, but for me sometimes it feels a little bit isolating when you are doing science of a different technical nature and use different methods, and then you're trying to like talk to colleagues who may or may not be as interested in that branching off.
Yeah, and I think, the other thing it does is it gives me a little bit of an insight on how others in our discipline, like how their brains work. Sitting in on doing volcano geophysics for a number of years, I kind of understood what that community would want in terms of data or things that I could show them that would persuade them. The fact that they don't really go in for qualitative data all that much. So you could have the most compelling qualitative data set that you think you've ever seen. And, nobody's really going to take that seriously until you can put some numbers behind it. Numbers really speak to a lot of scientists in a way that qualitative data just can't. So having that a little bit of insight on how people in those disciplines think has really helped me craft more compelling arguments when I'm speaking to them. So that's been really helpful too.
Okay. So I guess my question would be, from the time that you started to now, have you seen attitudes soften or change and improve? And also for students or other people in this field that are just hearing about the IAGD for the first time, what kind of resources does the organization offer that you think would be of benefit for people with similar lived experiences?
Yeah, people ask me all the time if I see any kind of change or movement on this topic. And, because some days when you're doing, equity and inclusion kind of work, it can feel like you're just sort of throwing yourself against a brick wall. But there has definitely been changes over time since when I first started doing this to now. I remember, one of the very first talks I gave on this, there were just a few people that showed up for the talk, and you know probably half a dozen, and they were engaged and interested, but the group was small. And now when I talk about this, the rooms are full and people are actually really excited and interested to hear about this. I've seen tangible change in some academic departments around the US who have invited us to come give workshops on field accessibility so that they can overhaul their undergrad programs. And, that is the kind of change I never really thought we'd see, that kind of real structural, tangible change that people are interested in doing. And that's very encouraging to me that, in some places it feels like we're not making any progress at all, but we are. Attitudes are changing. And, real progress is being made. In terms of resources, the IAGD is an especially great resource for students. We have we have the Student Pathways Scholarship, which is for our students with disabilities in the geosciences. It is a no questions asked, like fill out a short form, uh, small grant that we give to students with disabilities that just need a little financial boost to get over, some monetary hurdle that they're having to completing their degree program. So we offer those twice a year. We do a fall and a spring rotation. So all the information on that's on our website if you're a student and looking for some monetary resources. For faculty, we also offer workshops and training. If one of my favorite resources that we have is our library of tactile graphics. So we have an online repository of graphics that are designed to be printed on thermal printers, which are usually available in university disability services offices. And they are raised print graphics of all kinds of general earth science topics. And they've already got the braille labels and everything, basically an entire textbook's worth of charts and graphs and images, the types of things that you would use to teach basic geoscience concepts. We have a whole library of those for teaching blind and low vision students. So that's a really great resource for teachers. And then we try to keep our website up to date on the types of research projects that are going on. And for people who like to go to science conferences, we also offer our accessible field trips, which are a great place for geoscientists with disabilities to meet community and just have a good time studying geology and not worrying about access barriers, but it's also a really great way for teachers that are interested in creating their own accessible field trips to learn our tips and tricks on how we put these programs together.
Wow, Anita, thank you so much for pointing us and our audience members to the extensive list of resources that the IAGD presents. And I want to just kind of backtrack a little bit to something you said at the beginning, right before you provided those resources.
Mhm.
You talked about a lot of change that you're seeing, an extensive change, and we kind of reminisced on how different that was several years ago compared to now. So I have to ask, not to put you on the spot, with these changes that you're seeing, what changes would you like to see regarding allyship in geoscience as we move forward, especially for those of us who are battling disability, whether it's visual or non visual, as we start to incorporate more justice principles and geoethics, and also just kind of deal with some of the pushback that's happening. What would you like to see for allyship? What looks like the ideal space for you?
That's a really good question. I would love to see accessibility as a core principle of the learning opportunities that we're building for our students. So, right next to the learning objectives that, you're laying out for your field trip, I want the next thing that people think about to be the accessibility principles of your field trip. Who can who can go on the field trip you just designed? And the opposite of that question, who can't go on the field trip you just designed? Just having faculty just bringing that to the forefront of the design process of, okay, you have your learning objectives, the educational objectives and what you want students to learn on this trip, but how do you want students to engage with the landscape? And are there ways that you can craft that engagement in such a way that a broader audience can participate, right? The more students can participate. And, I think that's really important. And then I'd say the third one is geoethics. You move on from there to like, okay, we've designed this field trip. We know who can and who can participate and how. And now we need to talk about, how we're engaging ethically with the landscape and the communities that live there. So I think if we could bring all of those together into how we design field trips rather than just, hey, let's go see this cool rock, right? Think of this as this really holistic process and that all of these merit your attention as an educator. I would love to see that.
So we like to end our pod on a fun note, and today we're going to the very appropriately named volcanic vault to test your geoscience knowledge.
Oh no.
It's one of those low stakes things, all right?
Sure.
So just tell us the first thing that comes to mind. Don't think too long and hard about it. All right, here's an easy one to get you started. What's your favorite volcano?
My favorite volcano right now is Kilauea because it cooperated for me and gave me an eruption last month, and I'm still like on cloud nine about it. So Kilauea, top of the list. Second favorite is my beloved for my PhD, which is Rattlesnake Crater in northern Arizona.
Ooh. All right, second question. The scale used to measure the power of a volcanic eruption is known as?
The VEI scale,
Ding, ding, ding. That's
the
correct.
Volcanic Explosivity Index.
Perfect.
Wow, you're on a roll. Okay, so what is the most well known supervolcano in the continental USA?
Oh, supervolcano? That's got to be Yellowstone. There's so much like pseudoscience around that thing. It's nuts.
It is. All I have to say, I'm very anti the use of the word supervolcano or the term supervolcano.
Yes, but it's so scary.
Listen, I think there was an episode we talked about bad geology movies. I don't know if you remember that, Kyron. Last but not least, Oklahoma or Florida?
Mm, for geology or to live in?
Either or. First answer that comes to mind, Oklahoma or Florida?
climate-wise, I am a Florida person. I hate winter with a passion, but I love Oklahoma for the people and the community.
Love
So,
that.
a little nuance there.
Love that. Well, Anita, it has been fantastic. Thank you for your intentional answers and vulnerability today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
And Oklahomans, I hope you heard that she put you second there. Just clarifying. Okay.
Yeah, they
Wow.
got to get rid of those snowstorms before I bump them up on the list.
I mean, I feel like climate change with that.
Yeah, they're working on it.
What an episode. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, folks, but I am sure this is not the last that we'll hear. Anita, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us and giving us these wonderful insights into the important work that you do. So, if you want to keep the conversation going, get in touch with us. If you have questions about geoscience, if you have questions about accessibility, or maybe you just want to know why Oklahoma might be getting warmer and it could go up on Anita's list. If you're just curious about how the natural world works, send us your questions and we'll do our best to unearth the answers that you seek. Tweet us at GeoTrip Podcast on Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, or email us at thegeotrippodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget, geoscience is everywhere around us. So the next time you're outside, take a look at the rocks, the mountains, or just the ground below your feet. There's a whole story written there in stone, just waiting to be discovered. We'll see you on the next episode of The Geotrip.